Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for listening to our podcast today. I'm Philip Ingram, and today with Lisa Short, we're talking about digital preparedness and learning for the new normal. Now, we need to define what the new normal is. Lisa, come on, what is this new normal that we're talking about?
Well, the new normal is certainly in 6 weeks changed from where we've had schools open, universities open, people at work, the majority of the world internationally travelling and so forth. But and I guess where our new normal is, it's digital and virtual. And where we've now got probably a complete flipped and pivoted model. Maybe if you look at it in that terms, we've gone from probably what I would have said, a slow adoption curve to digital infrastructure, and particularly in learning and education, to a completely flipped model where you might have had previously, let's just say 15 to 20% of those who were very actively engaged in the virtual world using digital technology for learning and education, talking about reshaping education, talking about the way we learn, talking about the tools that we can use to enhance our learning, engage business and so forth, to now we've got sort of virtually overnight where we now have a good 80% of the world, 70 to 80% of the world now working fully digitally. That's the new normal.
But why do we think this is new? Because we've had the digital world for such a long period of time. Yes, we weren't going to mention the COVID-19 pandemic much, but it's triggered us into this. But it's something that businesses should have been prepared for, because it's been at the top of most governments' resilience planning and business resilience planning, or should have been through local resilience forums and all the rest of it, because an influenza type pandemic spreading across the globe has been the number one threat for at least 10 years. So are we being forced down this new normal path, or is it just a function of there's an opportunity now to properly exploit it?
I think it's partly both. I agree. I've been for 10 years talking about and mapping, for example, 21st century skills and skills required for the fourth industrial revolution. Around the world, we've been talking about different educational frameworks to embed those skills for at least 10 years. In fact, every major educational framework around the world has a set of identified, a little list of all these wonderful skills that we're supposed to have, and yet they have not been embedded in curriculum, training packages, learning outcomes and so forth in 10 years. I absolutely agree. Our new normal is something we've known about all this time. But what's been the trigger to, I guess, go from organic growth, as I call it, in this space to exponential? And I think there's a couple of factors involved in that. I think it's technology itself, but of course COVID-19. And I quite often talk about the fact that many people are saying that COVID-19 is responsible for, the entire demise of our economy as we know it now, and the traumas and hardships and the changes in education, the changes in business. And I disagree. It's not. Government and decision makers and those who've been in roles of policy making and advancing technologies have failed fundamentally the world in preparing us for now. I mean, we've been an international, globalized world, and we've been told that we need to be that for, probably 20 years that I'm aware of. I think the new normal, it's the normal we've had. And we've just had to push us over the edge. It's almost like we've been in that VR experience where, and if anybody's been in a VR experience and you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and you know full well that there's no Grand Canyon in front of you, but you've got to take it. You can walk out into that and can do it safely. And that's, I guess, where we were. Everybody was sitting on that precipice, but there was nothing pushing us past that point. We've been pushed now past that point.
But in the preparation terms, we can criticise the governments. That's fantastic. But a lot of the preparation that goes on is not necessarily government. We're looking at academia. We're looking at the whole and the holistic learning experience that's out there, and properly getting people prepared to use new and transformational digital technologies in a way that's for the good of society, but within that, the good of business as well. Why have the learning establishments not been more forward in their preparation for these sorts of technological advances that we're now having to exploit very rapidly because nobody's ready for it?
To be honest, it's not to their benefit. It hasn't been to their benefit to now. There's a number of contributing factors to that. First of all, many of the universities and the way they're funded and their economic model is based on research and is based on government funding. Doesn't matter where you are, whether it's the UK, Australia, Canada, Singapore, the US, how they obtain their funds. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that they're traditionally entrenched in the way that they've always done things. I mean, let's be really honest. Education has not had a revolution in it and since the Industrial Revolution, when at a time we needed to very quickly educate people on how to use new mechanical infrastructure. So the best way they could come up with was, well, if we put everybody together that's the same age and we shove them in a classroom together, or we all put them together and then we just move them through in those age groups, that's how we'll educate them. We have been using that system for over 120 years. It hasn't changed. And yet everything around us has changed. So I think, there's multiple things involved in that. Unless there's a reason to change, unless it's to force them into changing, and I guess in some ways that's vulnerability and fear. They've been so steadfast in the way that they sit, whether it be schools, whether it be universities, whether it be further education colleges or whatever it may be. They're traditionally entrenched in the way that they've always done things. I presented at an educational conference a couple of days ago, and one of the things I said to them was, how about you go out and do a hackathon to test your hypotheses for PhD students and grad students? And I could literally see the mortification in their faces when I'm saying things like that. Don't go to an academic and ask. Don't sit in an academic room and go, I wonder what we can investigate and put 3 years worth of our life into and a lot of money into it, and then go out to the world with no relevance or no value. So, I think a lot of it's to do with the traditional way that, they have been entrenched. I think also they haven't been challenged in that. Don't think there's anybody. It's such a big entity, if you like. Education worldwide is such a huge entity to try and challenge and try and change. But I like to think of it a little bit like, the way that we've changed the fintech system, and we've gone from having cash and a cash society where we have to go to banks and get $100 of cash out of the bank, to how we've incrementally and in a parallel way built a bridge from what we had, which was massively entrenched in our day-to-day lives, to a new way of doing things. And we've incrementally improved and changed the way now people engage financially, where we started with FPOS machines, and then we had contactless, and then we had no contactless. We used our phones, and then now we won't have cash at all. And how's that happened and over a period of time? So I think, a lot of the reasons it doesn't change is it's a big beast. Education is a big beast.
It is, but also we're finding technologically that the pace of change from a technology perspective is being dictated by the market, is being dictated by the technology innovators. Do you think that part of this new normal is going to be the legislators in government and the educators that are out there recognizing that actually they're going to have to keep up with a pace of technical innovation, or find some way of closing that gap a bit better? Absolutely.
I think the vulnerability of our universities to physical face-to-face learning and dependent on I would say a lack of diverse market in students. So many of the universities around the world have been dependent on Asian students in particular, because they're high numbers, and they were full fee paying students, for example, and of course that was taken away. The ability for students to not be able to attend university, and if they can't attend university and there's no alternative, they can't charge them fees and they've just lost revenue. So I think their financial model has just been rocked. And they're all feeling the pinch. So I think that's in some ways been a bit of a push. But I think the other thing that's important is, and if I can give an example, we actually have to leapfrog 20 years with educational the institution of education, and I'm not just talking universities, I'm talking schools, I'm talking further education, and they've probably done better than most, and universities, and in fact talk about that as one sector, by the way, learning sector. But one of the problems that we have is when we talk about this gap in digital skills, and if I can use an example, I presented at the Immersive Learning Research Network conference, and it's a state-of-the-art conference for the world's best in VR, virtual reality and augmented reality, in London mid last year. What's extraordinary is you go into Westminster University, and we're here to talk about some state-of-the-art technology in terms of how we can embed this in learning to truly reshape education. I don't mean take the written word and put it online. I'm saying, how do we do education differently? How do we engage learners? How do we deliver learning differently? How do we deliver scalable assessment using virtual reality, for example, because we can't get teachers and educators into many areas in the numbers that we do. So here I am about to do this presentation, and I turn up with my Apple Mac, and I would say I need to connect to the internet, and I also need to connect to the data projector. Can somebody help me? And we spend an hour trying to figure out how to do that. And at that moment, it's profound that our educational institutions are not only in their mindset 20 to 30 years behind the innovation curve and the technology curve, their physical infrastructure is at least 20 to 30 years behind the frontier technology and innovation curve. And what was amazing was that same day, did that at lunchtime, and later that afternoon, I presented to the APPG on blockchain and AI about blockchain in education. And I've spoken about this regularly, where I sort of split it up into three. I spoke about using frontier technology, but particularly blockchain and AI in this case, in the business of education to make it more efficient so that we could shift resources so that the universities could begin and commence to deliver education in a different way. The second part obviously was about what is that different way? How do we engage with technologies to truly shift that conversation? And I will further that in this podcast, talking about, different ways that learners can earn and learn and those sorts of things. And of course, the third thing is education about the technology. What do you need to know about this technology to support your learning? What are the learners being given information about to make their learning journey more positive? And it's not happening because, of course, there is, in terms of the curriculum that's still being delivered by our institutions in the main, because there is a couple that are innovative, there is still no formalised assessment of 21st century skills and Industry 4 skills, because they haven't embedded them in the learning program. So
I couldn't agree more with that. And it's interesting. I'm holding in my hand here my iPhone, and it's quite a good one. It's an iPhone X. It's got probably about 100 times the computing power that NASA had to take the manned flights to the moon and back. Yet all those people that we see in the street that are walking around with these high-powered computing systems to their ears most of the time or connected to their headphones don't quite understand the technology, how they use. And we translate that as what you said there into a learning environment, and it translates equally into a business environment. Whenever it comes to connecting all these different things, that should be second nature because we're all carrying these high-powered computing systems. Everyone automatically defaults to it's the IT department instead of it being part of society, and should be basic skill sets that we have throughout society. And if we haven't got those, how can we be ready for moving into blockchain? And I know by just saying that word, a lot of people will be hiding under the table going, yeah, I've heard it. I don't quite know what it is and how it can help and everything else, but it is the currency and it is the future.
Well, I agree. If I said to the majority of the population, and I have asked this question in question and answer sessions in presentations that I've done and around the world, the second language of the world is coding. English is the first and coding is the second language. and yet it's not a core part of our curriculum. We're still teaching, reading, writing, and arithmetic as the 3 key skills. And I'm sorry, it's changed. I'm not in any way advocating by the way that we don't need to have those skills. But when coding is the second language of the world, there should not be a child that doesn't have those skills. But the challenge that we've got is that the education system means that we've got teachers that don't have those skills, educating our children all the way through. So, these are some of the core structural challenges and infrastructure challenges that we have with education if we are truly going to advance. Now, bring us back to the new normal, that's what's changed.
Yep.
So in many ways now you've got, I know I've got colleagues here in Australia that have really just thought I was off the planet for the last 10 years in terms of some of the stuff. They just go, I really have no idea what you're talking about, Lisa. I have no idea what you do. I don't understand a damn thing that you talk about in terms of technology and blockchain, and I don't want to know. Well, guess what? You now need to know. And in fact, the presentation I did to the academic conference the other day, the very question that I opened with was why everyone should care about blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, even if you don't understand it and even if you don't care. That was the point that I started with. You don't have to understand how it works, but what you have to understand is the impact and how it will affect your learning, just the same as the internet did 20 years ago. And people forget, they will quite often say, I've got no capacity to do that, and I disagree. I can remember when, my children were probably started year 7 or 8 or 9 or something, so they were probably about 12 or 13, and we bought our first computer at home. And I thought, this is great. Bought the computer, sat it up, turned it on, and there's this little green flashing thing looking at me. And I'm thinking, now what do I do? I had no idea. So, and I've learned. I've had to teach myself. It's a constancy, and that's one of the 21st century skills that has to be embedded when we talk technology. It's lifelong learning.
Yeah. Every
day there's new software. Every day there's a new capacity. I didn't know anything about blockchain 5 or 6 years ago, and I've taught myself. And others can do it as well. I can teach my 85-year-old parents to use iPads. So that's been an excuse till now for the inability or the lack of drive and inertia. Now we're on this vertical curve where, guess what? Overnight you were told you had to. And it will never go back to the way it was, because it's going to set up parameters where people realise its potentials and what its possibilities are. And I guess the other thing that's more important is this will not be the last time we have a pandemic. It'll be the first, and it'll continue, and there'll be other things that'll happen that may impact the way that we move forward from now as well. So our new normal is accepting that we have to go on a journey of a lifelong journey, and part of that's technology, and part of that's blockchain, whether you like it or whether you don't. Blockchain, AI, Internet of Things, data, cybersecurity, without a doubt, they're core skills.
And it's a simple prioritization thing. If people feel that they haven't got time to start to look at this and look forward, it means they're standing still. If you're standing still, in reality, you're going backwards. And therefore, if you're not innovating, or if you're not planning forward and looking forward and developing forward and prioritizing your time to allow you to build on some of those skills, or at the very least understand the impact of where technologies are going and how it's going to affect you, whether you're in business or in academia or in policy making or wherever, then you're not in a position to continue to do your job in the future. And it's getting that understanding out there that this is something that is critical for people to be able to take forward and to remain at the forefront of where you've spent many, many years. And I spent many, many, many more years than probably a lot of your listeners or our listeners that are out there getting to that point. But I'm always learning, always changing skills, always trying to look forward. And that's something that I have been surprised in the current pandemic at the number of companies that I've come across who are not doing anything. They're sticking their head in the sand, and they're just hoping for this to go away, and they're hoping that normality is going to be as it was beforehand, instead of recognizing it's going to be different and preparing themselves to get into this new normality that we are going to get in there. And you prepare ourselves, we can, and be in a position to not exploit it, but to use it to our greatest benefit and greatest effect. That can be done relatively straightforwardly with a little bit of forward thinking and, if necessary, a little bit of advice.
I agree. I had a discussion yesterday, in fact, with a company and a group of people here in Australia. And this same conversation I've had in Africa and the same conversation I've had in Europe and Canada. So, it's a global conversation where, again, they've been reticent to deploy technologies and advanced frontier technologies, and started a series of business improvement processes, if you like, change tables. That's really what it is, sitting people around. One of the reasons in the graphics of this presentation is the hands. How do we do this? It's the hand-holding process to allow these businesses to know that they've got enough support, because I do acknowledge that there is a lot of people that are really being challenged and feel like they're being left behind because it's happened so quickly. So how do we help them through that? One of the points that I made in the discussion that I had yesterday was China. 25th of June, they are releasing their what's called DNS, which is their blockchain infrastructure for the entire country of China. And it will affect every single system, process, methodology, everything that comes out of China. In fact, they'll be running their digital currency on it as well. Now, Russia has been using blockchain for their infrastructure, and there's many other countries around the world, UAE, etc. Now, what do some of those countries have in common? They're our biggest trading hubs and our biggest trading nations. So the conversation I had yesterday was with an organisation here that regularly does trade with China. And I'm saying the workshops that we want to run, which is to onboard businesses to a blockchain-based or a solution that uses blockchain as an engine for global trading, we need to get these businesses on board this system now, because I've got news for you. After the 25th of June, if you want to trade with China, if you want to work with China, if you want to deliver news, if you want to have any form of information or engagement, you will need to have knowledge and skills and be onboarded to this system, or you will not have business with China. And if you don't have it yourself, they will onboard you to their system, because that's the way it's going to be. Now, you don't have years and months to think about this. We're talking 25th of June. It's like 6 weeks away. The system has been spoken about as breathtaking. Two of our biggest unicorns, Google, Twitter, obviously with the growth of false news and misinformation and the lack of veracity of information around the world, whether it be statistical data or whether it be news media and social commentary, has been huge. It's the only thing that's been spreading faster than COVID-19.
Yes.
But both of those are in the process of implementing methodologies where every single person who wants to advertise with those institutions are going to have to verify their identity and what country they come from. And you'll be able to go back and see the veracity of where that advertisements and where that information is coming from. And I talked about this exact same thing in the academic world. I was quite interested that my presentation followed a presentation regarding plagiarism. So there was, an extensive amount of time and effort to talk about how terrible plagiarism is, and that it's a scourge on the academic world, and it's a disrespect and all of those things. And I said, but what if you didn't have to worry about it? What if the minute that information is generated and it's registered on a blockchain, I said you can always go back and check the veracity of that information. You can actually determine whether that information is veracious, whether it is factual, who it's come from, where it's come from, whether it's come from somebody who is deliberately trying to misinform or mislead. You also can't plagiarize it, because the minute that you use that information, it tags to its original source, and you can't do it. So then Plagiarism is not the conversation that we used to have before. The same as copyright.
But then does it not allow a platform that would allow those higher level players when it comes to disinformation to put information on through different areas that has got all the right certifications, all of the right ticks in the boxes for authentication and everything else, but they know that it's deliberately false, and as people check on it, it's going to reinforce that falsehood, and therefore it's the old garbage in, garbage out routine when you're dealing with it, especially when we're looking at not just blockchain, but applying artificial intelligence then across blockchain. And it's going to potentially be in a position where if you've got nation states controlling this in a way where some of them are more suspicious than others, but they're bringing it in from the outset, they've got a greater chance of being able to put data into that can influence the markets from for their good rather than anyone else's good from the outset. And every time we check on it, we're going to think that that's information has got the right sort of veracity, it's got the right sort of authentication and everything else. But in reality, it's not. It's influencing, not informing.
Certainly. I mean, there's always, in terms of, educational speak, we talk about rules of assessment and things, and we talk about validation and moderation. And that's a perfect example of that, where something can be reliably unreliable every single time.
Yep.
It will be wrong and it will be unreliable every single time. But that's one of the amazing things when I talk about reshaping education. And a lot of people will hear me talk about embedding the use of a decentralized autonomous organisation, even into a system where we're verifying information. So in a decentralized autonomous organisation, it's not just one entity that's verifying it. It goes out to verification. So to get that verification and to get the tag, if you like, or the badge, if you like, to say, hey, I'm truthful and it comes from a good source, then it has to have multiple sources all over the world who verified the veracity and challenged it, questioned it, and so forth. So there's multiple ways that we can look at this approach. And I think really and honestly, when we look at it, we've actually got that now. So we've still got a system now where somebody can put, misinformation out there and it looks like it's come from the most valid source, ever. The Queen of England could have said that it's this, but in fact it never comes from the Queen of England. I think in terms of making sure that we shift education, we shouldn't be held back by, the conspiratorial thought either, because for every problem or challenge, we've also got a great solution. So I think that's an important discussion, that we need to have. But I mean, in terms of, just some basics, even if we start at a base level, there should not be an education institution in this world right now who is not issuing a credential on a blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Every single credential is issued. Now that's just a base level start. Can you imagine the shift in resources and infrastructure costs if that was done, and we could then shift those resources to use those resources for better good to actually start to embed different ways of learning, and how do we engage, learners around the world?
So part of this new normal, quite clearly, is an increased reliance is probably the wrong word, but need to embrace the new technological environment that we are finding ourselves in, and that's going to shape our future. And if we don't embrace that, we're not preparing ourselves properly for how this new normal that we've been accelerated into through the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was always coming.
Sure. I think, there's a very large percentage of the world is sitting waiting for this to be over, and we'll all go back to normal, and it won't.
Yeah.
And that is the pivotal point that we're at, where we can choose to go back to that, the things that we've known, or will be pushed moving forward. And when I say pushed, the economy and the challenges that we've had and the resilience that we're now experiencing, or that we need to experience to move forward into the future, are going to become the new normal. People aren't going to want to go back to feeling this vulnerability that they're feeling now. And that's the conversation that's happening around the world. How do we do things differently? All the big, hackathons, the global hackathons where you've got 15, 20,000 people coming together saying, how do we resolve these challenges so we never experience this feeling again? None of them are saying, so we don't ever experience another pandemic or whatever. They're saying this could happen again. What are we going to do differently moving forward? I think the way that now you've got learners learning from home, you're learning online. You've got businesses working online. They're struggling. They're struggling with the combinations of using fintech, video equipment, digital resourcing. How do I stay engaged with people across the world and so forth? And if I can use another example, again, the big global B2B trade platform. This is the thing where businesses need that hand holding. And, you and I have had this discussion about that's one of the most critical tasks for business now is to get somebody reliable to hold their hands, to say, what are the 6 steps that I need to do? And how do I do it in the next 3 months? I'm not talking 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. I'm talking in the next 3 months. Mm-hmm. And, the resistance for that to occur is still extraordinarily high. And I remember saying to a group who said, their answer to me was, when we were talking about, now is the time to run these change table sessions. Now is the time for us to come and work with your business leaders, your boards, your, innovation departments, your educational units, your universities, your schools, whoever it may be, to deploy something that's tangible that you can at least understand to start you on this journey. Yep. And one of the answers that I got was, no, I don't think we've got any product or anything that would sort of work. I don't really think that I could trade with anybody overseas. And I went, okay. And in this case, I was talking again to somebody here in Australia. And I said to them, so do you sell your product to Melbourne? Of course. Do you sell it to Perth? That's 5 hours away, by the way. So that's further than most English people travel for holidays.
Yes.
And I said, yeah, of course. Don't be silly. Of course. What about New Zealand? Do you trade with? Oh, yes, they're our neighbours. I said, so what difference does it make in a virtual world whether that product that you're selling has gone to New Zealand or whether it goes to Dubai or whether it goes to Milan or whether it goes to London? If there's an infrastructure underneath that facilitates that. And they sort of looked at me and I said, and that's the learning that you've got to shift your mind to. Hence the reason, I named, my business Mind Shifting is literally to shift minds.
Yeah.
It's to shift them into a new state.
And it's interesting.
And that's where we've got to get to.
Yeah, it's interesting in the discussion there. You brought out the business saying they didn't have the product necessary to do that, and it's people thinking of things from a product or a capability perspective instead of an effect perspective and a business effect perspective. And I think this is another thing that is potentially going to come into the new norm. It's not just about embracing this new technology that scares a lot of people because they hear the words blockchain or they hear the words artificial intelligence. And a lot of people that you talk to out there who are using them don't quite understand what they mean and where they'll fit in, but they will quite happily throw them into sentences because it makes them sound good. But it's the new normal. Will get back to even more basics. It's the changes that we've experienced that we've been accelerated into over this period of time are changes such that if they're properly embraced and properly brought into normal business practices, they're going to save bottom line today. They're going to make businesses more efficient. Therefore, they're going to make them more competitive across the globe. And those that embrace them and take them forward from a progressive professional business perspective, focusing on the effect they're trying to achieve from a business perspective, are the ones that are going to come out of this and come out of this really quite well. Those that don't are going to go backwards faster than even we're seeing many of the airlines that are going out of business and the retail stores and all the rest of it who have already gone backwards because they haven't prepared. And now is the time, I think, for the people that are listening to this to recognize that if you haven't started that preparation, you need to start talk to people to get you on the right line to make sure that you are properly preparing for the opportunities that there are in the future.
Oh, look, I agree. I've been saying in this, the words possibilities, potentials, opportunities, purposeful, intentional. Now I see the greatest opportunity for people and business to move forward. And, again, I'll bring this back to education. When I'm seeing, the conference world, and of course, the way that educational lectures and tutors and broadcast information is going out, I'm just sitting here going, this is just such a massive opportunity to shift this innovation curve. So when I'm seeing, for example, businesses engaging in, 4 and 5 way conversations or 50 to 100 people in a discussion, what I'm not seeing is their capacity to truly engage in a digital way. So if you're using video and virtual technology like Zoom or GoToMeetings or Skype or whatever it may be, you want to be able to see the individual. So there's some basic things. You want to be able to be looking as if you're in the same room. You are engaging digitally. You're not just having a phone call. You're actually engaging digitally. So it's the same as when you're delivering an educational experience. If you just pick up a textbook and somebody filmed it and you moved it across the screen, that's not putting learning online. When you're delivering a presentation, and if you're talking in conferences, putting a PowerPoint, sharing a PowerPoint screen is and having your learners or your audience, in this case, which could be millions of people around the world, they're going to be seeing your PowerPoint presentation 18 inches away from their face. They're literally focused on that PowerPoint presentation and are going to be seeing a little box with you in the corner. Please don't put a PowerPoint presentation on there and just read from it, because guess what? The person on the other end can do that just as well as you can and read. This is an opportunity to truly change what you put up on that screen and engage with them. Use different tools, use gamification tools, use fantastic ways of engaging with your audience, great graphics, and those sorts of experiences. So the person that you're engaging with, whether it be a conference, whether it be an educational experience, feels like they're in the room with you. They feel like they're engaging and they're learning and experiencing something very, very different. Put some effort into it. I have a million, like you, background. So if I'm speaking with an audience and, I want to have a picture of London in the background, I want to take my audience on the journey with me. But the point is, they are all skills that need to be educated and learned by the current population. And you and I can talk about them, easily, but unless we start to educate en masse, we will not move forward on that. So even that is a set of learning skills, because digital engagement is the way we are going to engage. If we can't do that, the isolation and the disparate nature of our education and learning moving forward is just going to become wider and wider and wider.
Yeah, and it's the adding value whenever you're giving a presentation, bringing your personality in, taking people through a journey, through the story of what's going on, is so much more than just putting the PowerPoint slides up and reading from a script as it goes through. An anecdotal story in that, in my past history, I'm a senior intelligence officer and senior planner, and there was a minister being briefed on what was happening in an operation that was going into a country in Europe many years ago, and the individual that stood up to brief him had rehearsed this time after time after time because the big boss had wanted to make sure it was right. He had a script typed out, he had the slides done perfectly, and the minister was sat down and the briefing started. It got to slide 3 and the minister turned around and said, excuse me, Colonel, are you just reading a script and going to read off the slides that are there? And he said, yes, sir, we've rehearsed this. And it's got the message. He said, right, give me the script, give me the slides. He stood up and took it off him and walked out and said, you're wasting my time. That's a message that people should learn in business. If you're not adding value to what you're putting on the screen, don't put it on the screen, or just send people a copy of the PowerPoint slide. And it's bringing that level of education into the so many different methods of getting the message out and getting the business message out and informing people and keeping people informed in this new normal that we have today, but is developing into an evolving new normal tomorrow?
I think, that sort of leads me to one really, really good point that, I like to talk about, and this is sort of, real educational speak, and obviously, the fact that this is EdTech, 2020, and it is always around education and learning and what's the new methodologies and processes and so forth that's out there. One of the things that I sort of, really rocked the foundations of education for was when I talk about virtual reality, using VR experiences for learning that is standardized. And there are some things that are standardized. And I'm talking about things like compliance education and in our careers and things about safety and a whole range of other things that we all need to know a certain thing. And it's a very prescriptive way that we can do it. And a lot of other learning that we do. I said there's a process called moderation and validation in education, which is where we have to ensure that if we use one assessment tool, and it's written by anybody, it's just an assessment tool, and that one assessment tool is used by a million people, a million tutors or teachers or facilitators of learning around the world. There's a personal element in that. We need to know that when that assessment tool is used, that whoever uses that the results that we get out of that are valid. We want to make sure that, a person in Africa who has delivered that assessment wasn't having a particularly bad day and made sure that person wasn't yet competent as the words that we use, or a person in Australia that did it was being a bit slack and they allowed that person through and they probably shouldn't have. They should have had a greater degree of capacity, because let's say it's something to do with, using military weapons. You certainly wouldn't want them going into the army not being able to use it because the person who was doing an assessment on it, was a bit easy. So we use this process called moderation and validation. When I say to people that if we truly are to scale learning, we have to scale assessment. And that's the big catch that we have at the moment. Most of our assessment tools require the personal element when it comes to practical tasks and skills, and that's where virtual reality is extraordinary. We can create a virtual world, and in that case, there is only one assessment tool and one assessor, and it's the virtual reality experience. We can set the touch points in a virtual reality experience to be the assessment. So we've now eliminated out of education the need to do validation and moderation. And can I tell you that contributes to probably 20 to 30% of the cost of the infrastructure and the resources in education and learning globally. And we could shift that resource to something different, and we could give a much more engaging educational experience. These aren't difficult concepts to understand, but they are if somebody is not educated on them. And this is where we really are at that pivotal moment of, right, we need, educational institutions and heads of departments who listen to this podcast say, how do we get in contact with you and how do we run these workshops? Yeah. Because we've got all our teachers and our trainers and everybody sitting at home fully engaged digitally. How do we do that? And that's the point that we need to be at right now.
And you've highlighted very clearly that that point is in a position to save dollars now. I think at that point it's probably a good time for us to bring in one of our friends from Africa and get an understanding from that continent.
Absolutely. Let's bring in Professor Mammo Muchie from Africa.
But also was educated in the UK and has travelled around the world and done a myriad of amazing things. Currently, he's the Chair in Innovation Studies, one of his many roles at Dishwan University, and his primary discipline is innovation in economic development and in economic sciences. Now, he has a very long CV, but we haven't got time to go through that. So he's an amazing, amazing man, but he also has a huge passion for mind shifting and moving Africa to the point where they own the fourth industrial revolution. So I'm really keen to get his input on the effect of COVID-19 on the African economy, particularly education and learning, and where he thinks that will go in terms of the incredible movement forward that's occurred in the last sort of 6 weeks. So, Mammo, over to yourself, and if you can give us your thoughts around that.
Thank you very much for your invitation and also your kind remarks. My name is Mammo. Mammo means a little boy. So I'm still a little boy. But the question you are asking is so relevant. I think we should all be discussing these serious issues and to find practical solutions on the creativity, on the innovation side. We should focus on it. Now, this COVID-19 that we are on, the entire world is on about now, we need to find genuinely an opportunity. We should turn the crisis into an opportunity.
So what I'm really interested in, Mammo, is I'm thinking bringing the conversation to specifically around education and learning for EdTechs and the people listening to the podcast. One thing that's really important is, how do you feel that the push, I guess, that the African economy has had to force people now to digitally engage, which they've not done a lot of before. Do you think that has now expanded the opportunity for engagement in all areas? So in terms of advancing research, ensuring that people within Africa have greater access to education and learning, venture creation, access to accelerators and that sort of activity around the world. I mean, we've talked about the African Innovation Lab, for example. So, you know, in many ways, the COVID-19 situation has leapfrogged and exponentially sped up the process of change and digitally engaging. What's your thoughts on how do we tangibly stop that falling back once the immediacy of the COVID-19 disaster finishes? You know, we've really got to keep this moving so that Africa continues to own the fourth industrial revolution. How do we make sure that happens?
I think very good question. Already, I just want to mention to you some facts. Mobile tech solutions to help address the COVID-19 pandemic have been now used very much to reach the ordinary people who normally do not know how to read and write, but who now know how to use mobile phones. So online COVID-19 triangle tool, which uses to self-assess the coronavirus risk category that has been developed. With the mobile, they can reach out very quickly to see so that they don't get into it. WhatsApp to run an interactive chat service has been also developed. And especially in South Africa, it's been periodically, almost every day, people engage about it. So many interesting things are happening. Because many African countries lack a healthcare system and widespread access to clean water, and risk is high in overall. But now, what people are now saying is that let's use the digital knowledge to reach to those who are not able to reach with each other. So the communication is spread, the knowledge is shared, so that the people will not be in this difficult situation. So there's also an approach that people are now working on. How do we tap local knowledge for awareness to make sure people are aware of the viruses? And in all this overcrowded, in the slum, in the rural areas, how do we go about dealing with this? Smartphone use is also giving, really it's very much being used in countries like Rwanda, Kenya. In all these places, they are using it very effectively to generate, again, knowledge and awareness so that people are doing it. There's so many interesting things are being developed.
Mammo, can we continue? I mean, that's with these advances using mobile technologies, and they've been able to get that out there in such a short period of time. You know, smartphones for people who had poor literacy skills and so forth before.
Yeah.
How can we continue to harness those same levels of skills, you know, past the virus? I mean, because we've got to move past the virus into, you know, continuing their capacity to improve. If they're using mobile devices, they can also get knowledge and learning of financial literacy using digital currencies, access to health services and so forth. What's the plans, you know, to ensure that we don't stagnate and just use it for that reason, and actually, instead of just going with the status quo, to ensure that those skills grow?
In fact, already now, they are asking people not to go to banks, money transfer is being done through this. In Kenya, you know about it, there's M-Pesa. Something like 20 million of the Kenyans already use it. Now they're expecting that the entire nation, they will do it in the next few years, that everyone will have it. So this is also happening in Rwanda and other places. They are developing mechanisms now, especially now because of this time, because it's very difficult. You know, I tried today to go to a bank, Upsize called. In the place where I went, it was all shut. I couldn't believe it because I was trying to give some money to some of the people that I support here. So I just said, let me get you some money, but I couldn't. So I had to find another way to get money.
But I think the investment that there's been in the digital infrastructure across Africa over the last few years has put it probably as a continent from a mobile digital infrastructure ahead of many other parts of the world, and therefore it's allowing the utility of apps and other mobile technologies to fill those gaps where you've got communities that are isolated in so many other ways. That's providing a real advantage, is it not, for the African continent?
It's true. No, I think what I didn't do today was my mistake. Was I should have used apps and do it here, but I could. It is possible. But instead, I just wanted to walk. So it didn't happen. But you're right.
I think I'm mindful of the time and ensuring that our listeners to the podcast sort of get the maximum value. And I guess in terms of moving forward, and Philip and I have had this discussion, we want to make sure that we leave the listeners, I suppose, with some really tangible tools that they can use. And of course, we hope this reaches some of our colleagues and so forth in Africa. And, as you know, I've been paramount in that, making sure that digital skills, 21st century skills around financial literacy, about the uses of digital currencies, around utilising a sovereign, ID, any of those sorts of things that we can empower through the use of blockchain, continue to be scaled out at a massive level across Africa, so we can do that. Can you give me what's if you were to say what the three top tangible things that could be done in the next month and 2 months to ensure that we continue to use these mobile infrastructures to deliver education? What would they be? Three things.
I think one of the most important things now is e-learning. All the schools and the high schools and the universities, and even the Ministry of Basic Education here in South Africa and the Ministry of Higher Education and all the others have to collaborate to make sure that there is not just simply the opportunity from their side to supply, but also people will have the actual digital infrastructure for them to be able to access it. Let me give you a concrete example. When we did our online for one day, a lot of people were saying to me, they were writing to us, saying that they couldn't continue because they need to pay for it. And some of them may not be able to pay. So what we need now is, if we have lots of people in the rural areas, in all these townships and so on, how could we have a very standardized, very strong Wi-Fi system, just like food and water? We should have this electricity provision, and at the same time, the Wi-Fi internet things, all these things you have been working on. I think that is critical. In fact, one of the key investments that I recommend that all the governments and all the companies, and if they collaborate, everybody, the triple helix, everyone collaborating, what we should do is provide now use this COVID-19 crisis to make sure that we can still actively work, even work better than when we work physically, because we can use the technology to actually create a very good opportunity for all of us to actually do anywhere. We can be anywhere. We can be swimming, still we'll be using it. We can be running, we could be using it. We can be sleeping, we can still use it. So we should be in a situation where we have 24 hours, activating energy that this digital time has brought us. I think, in fact, as we said earlier, I told you that the virus is going to continue until we change our economic and other strategies, the way we produce. I think this has to change too, because you see, the economy, the way the economic logic we use is not good. Because when we say profits, it's profit for money. Money is the measurement. It's the market advantage. It's the commercial advantage. It's the money advantage that the people get. They don't care about the social, the environmental, and other impacts. China has grown, industrialized, but at the expense of nature. All right? Europe has developed at the expense of nature. America has developed at the expense. Now we should educate Africa. Please, Lisa, educate them. Mindset change, as you keep telling me all the time. They need to develop in a different way. It's not simply gaining profit, gaining market advantage, making commercial gain. It's also making sure health matters.
Well, I agree. We've had this discussion a number of times, haven't we, Mammo, that, mind shift change and delivering impact through the value of education and technology is about making impact. It's not, and from that, we will get venture creation and future economies and people will be employed and so forth. But if we, something as basic as hearing you say something as basic as Wi-Fi, we might have mobile technology, but I know it is data driven, so they actually do need to have Wi-Fi. So I guess some of our learnings out of this is that certainly for Africa, and I know I am mindful of the time, but I think that's probably a key takeaway. I mean, there's lots of things. Imagine the opportunity for somebody wanting to invest in Wi-Fi infrastructure in Africa and the growth from that. I mean, you could develop it using a BOT, build, operate, and then transfer. So technology company could go in, build the infrastructure, operate it, charge a small fee, and then eventually that be transferred back to Africa or something like that. There's plenty of ways of doing that. But I think we certainly have created the need for it. Now we've just got to keep that impetus going.
And recognise that digital technology is now an essential resource for not the survival of the human race, but for the development of the human race in a sustainable way.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it, that we've flipped that around in the sense that many would argue that the internet and digital technologies have divided us, and now here we're saying that we actually need to, exponentially increase the infrastructure there to bring us back together and to actually ensure that we grow one of the biggest economies we can in a more sustainable way. So it's really quite amazing that they're the sort of discussions that are coming out of where we are at the moment in terms of education.
I think this time, the COVID-19 time, should give us a lot of education about how we also change our economic relations, our human relations, our relationship to nature, and our relationship to each other. Even the way we bring children or produce them, all these things have to be rethought now. This is a time to do it. Otherwise, what we are hearing is that virus will continue. Yeah. This is what scientists are saying. It's not just a COVID virus. If we don't know how to handle it, it will continue. So what we need of all the time, what we need to do is we should think, how can we create opportunity from crisis? How can we not allow crisis to create more crisis, but we want it to create more solutions, not more problems, more solutions. This is a time to think. I think, as you rightly put it, Philip, the digital time must be a time to solve, to create our humanity, even to improve it, to make it better. And so that we can live in this planet and save the planet also.
I was going to say, this is the time, Mammo, for that African Innovation Lab, for things like hackathons and those sorts of innovation think tanks to develop hypotheses for what those solutions are and to start to build them from an Afrocentric way. So, there's huge opportunity in that space.
No, I was just going to say, I thought what Mammo had said there and brought together, it was an absolutely fantastic summary of where technology and the importance of educating in technology will contribute to the wider sense of good, not just in Africa, but across the world. And Africa is a microcosm of where some of the issues are that maybe other people don't realize, but that brings in the importance and the necessity for a globally focused education program. Absolutely. To bring us all together in a much better way. We
must not stop at the education now. I'm not stopping. We're working every day. In fact, we're working more now at home than when I was. Well, I think, and what you just said, just before we leave, what you just said about African innovation, all these hubs and so on, there are many, many opportunities to develop them, but the way to make them function properly is still also a challenge. So we need to find a way how we can also, again, make sure that all these activities that we do can be run properly, and also use also the COVID-19 challenge to actually redesign them very practically to make sure that they produce output that is tangible, measurable, and actionable. I think we need to think like that also very much. We also need to create an innovation system. It's instead of making it an economic innovation system or a social innovation system or a technology innovation system or a health innovation system, let's combine it, integrate it, so that all the scientists also from every side and make contributions, so we know the weakness and strengths on each side, so we can create a unified system that allows us to actually solve any problems, not just solve existing problems when we face them, but anticipate, predict problems to come and prevent the problems from happening. Unless we do that, we will not save this planet. The risk we are in is not good. So we need to really work very hard with joy, with fun. We should make it enjoyable to make sure that this hard work we do is to save this humanity and to save the world and to save our planet and to save all the wonderful things, the civilization, everything. With all our problems, we have all together also created some wonderful things, and let's save it and then see. And let also God help us.
Well, Mammo, on that note, we can't get a better note to finish on the positivity that there is, and hopefully we'll get an awful lot more positivity out of this terrible pandemic that we're going through. But it's one thing is certain: it's the technology that will help enable it, and it's education that will help us utilize that technology for a greater good. Thank you very much indeed for giving up some of your time to talk to us.
No, I really appreciate both of you for also.
Thank you, Mammo.
Wonderful. So wasn't that fascinating hearing about the experiences that there are in Africa at the moment? And it's important that we look at different continents and bring this global picture together.
Look, yes, it is. I think Africa has got a number of opportunities and potentials as well. And, we've heard the massive impact that the new normal is having on 54 nations of Africa, and again, their need to move forward with innovation if that country is to truly own the future and the fourth industrial revolution. But I think it also leads us into some of the pitfalls if we don't. And, it won't just be Africa, it'll be the rest of the world as well.
What are some of the pitfalls that we are potentially going to fall into with this?
Complacency is one. I think the sense of vulnerability that we all felt when our ability to move around the world with freedom and to do the things we've done before placed everybody in a sense of vulnerability. The longer that we go on in this environment, even that tends to become a little bit and we become immune to it, and we'll become quite complacent to where we're going. And it allows us potentially to fall back into a sense of, well, we can go back to the way we were when we can't. Particularly, and I'm going to use an example, for women. And everybody knows, women's leadership is extremely important to me. 2 months ago, we had people saying that women with children and requiring flexibility, and young mothers and even dads and parents didn't have that flexibility to work from home and conduct their work in a professional way and get work done economically and viably. Well, guess what? They just did. And you just told them they could. So moving forward, you've got a new normal for that environment alone. You've got businesses that now have moved and pivoted innovation to produce a different product, whether it be, respirators or hand sanitizers. We've shown that they can do that. We've got people that used to just hop on a plane to go some ridiculous place and spend a ridiculous amount of money, now actually having conversations like this. So the new normal will never go back. Problem with is if we have complacency, we will have massive losses and shifts in businesses. And that's one of the traps. And I think the other trap and big challenges that we have is certainly around the cybersecurity and the security issues with us moving digitally, and that we literally take what we've done previously and put it all online. And we can't. It's a different world. So I think there are two, there's many, many pitfalls that we will experience, but I think there are a couple of the big ones.
Yeah, and on the cyber side of things, people have now increased the number of endpoints that they're working through with all this homeworking that's going on, and putting it through networks that haven't been run through the protocols that many IT departments have got to make sure that networks are being properly monitored. The passwords on home routers are almost certainly not up to the sort of standards yet. There is intellectual property and personally identifiable data is being now processed on, hopefully for everyone that's listening, work computers with all the right levels of security on them. But I suspect in many cases it's being done on private devices. And that in itself is going to cause real problems with some of the legislative side of things, with the data protection regulations across the globe, but also the threats that there are to intellectual property. And I've just been speaking to an international TV station on this very subject, and there are individuals who are exploiting it just for bad purposes. There are nation states who are exploiting it to identify personally identifiable data and potentially leak that to steal intellectual property to further their political aims. And there are criminal gangs who are exploiting it and are quite successfully at the moment ripping off an awful lot of companies that are out there. So the bad actors are working, and that's a critical piece that's being overlooked by many people, and a lesson that's going to have to be learned for the future.
Look, I agree. And I think the other one that's a big pitfall and it's a trap is the free economy, not being paid for work. So one of the trends, and I see it as a worrying trend and certainly a pitfall, is that there's sort of been this assumption made that if we have shifted from the physical world to engaging digitally, that people don't get paid for their work. And that comes back to whether it be their intellectual property, their copyright, their time, having conversations, connecting people. I guess that's the other dimension that we're moving into, is commercializing the new digital and virtual world time. And I'm sure people like you and me, we've experienced it immensely. I've never been busier in my life, but there's not often this conversation about how you're going to be paid for that work. So there's a very worrying trend in that space. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean to say it's not the same level of intellectual property and time and effort that's going into it. So they are some of the pitfalls, and I think, again, it comes with the call to action for education, particularly in the business world, and those that are pivoting education and the economy as well. So and it's the other thing. It's you get nothing for nothing. So if you're relying on free information and what's coming out there, yes, you'll get a good overview and a good background. But the reality is that things need to be bespoke. They need to be bespoke for what it is that you need and what you're trying to achieve, the effect that you're trying to achieve. And to do that in the same way in the
physical world, you would have to pay for the right experts to come in and do it. Don't automatically assume because you've Googled it or you've seen it in a podcast or you've been to a fantastic event like this and listened to some fantastic speakers that is the be all and end all and will give you everything that you need. The only way that people are going to accelerate themselves forward properly are by getting that bespoke, focused expert advice to make sure that the circumstances that you're in are understood and where you want to go to are understood, and engage in the same way. You're going to probably get better value for money because it's being done this way, but it's the old adage, you get nothing for nothing. So how do people get hold of the likes of you and me to come and get that proper advice?
Absolutely. And I was just going to say that, our details on the bottom of the screen, and, both of us are on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm at Lisa G Short on Twitter, and you're Philippine. What's your
Philippine MBE on Twitter.
That's it.
You can find me on LinkedIn anywhere. Yeah,
the same. And I think so. We're easy. We're very easy to get hold of. And I think you actually just brought to the fore a really important, engaging point. It's the personalisation. Again, it's the reason that the two hands are on the graphics of this is that, the likes of you and I can literally go into a business in a very personable way. We can bring in, if you've got a challenge, we can bring in the best experts there is in that space to assist, which is a new dimension of hand-holding that has not been able to have before. So, we're literally hopping into a business in a very personable way that has not been allowed to, it was not been facilitated before. So I think that's really, really important. So, both of us are available in the details on the bottom. And, a call to action is something that's really important. And we're not talking, as you and I have said, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. We are saying that 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months to deploy change.
Yeah, and again, those businesses that for various reasons have not been able to maintain activity through this difficult period of time, that are looking at coming out into this new normal. It's like if you leave your car sitting there for a long period of time and it's not used, your battery's going to go flat. You might need the breakdown service to come along and give you a bit of a jump start and get you going again. In business terms, this new norm and people understanding, or people who are watching the new norm, like we're doing at the moment, we're in a position to come along and help give you that jump start, get you into that new norm, and then you're going to be running normally as ever. So please feel free to come and use us.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other advantages is the level of experience is there. So we're not just people who just saying it. We've lived it. We've been there. We've done that. We've got that level of experience. And you and I are going through that learning curve too. There's not a day where, we haven't exchanged about new forms of technology and software that we're using as well. So it's that real experiential process rather than the old consulting model, if you like, of not adding value. So I think that is really important, and certainly reach out.
So for those that are listening, I hope we've added a little bit of value for you today. Thank you very much indeed for spending your time and downloading this podcast. Our contact details are around. We look forward to speaking to you again at some stage in the future.